Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pod Ever After, a Once Upon a Time rewatch podcast. I'm Alana.
I'm Tessa.
And today we're going to be talking about 107 and 108. But before we do that, just very briefly, how are you doing tonight, Tessa?
I'm actually starving. There are 3 pierogies on the stove with my name on them, and they're just a little too far out of reach at the moment. How are you, Alana?
I'm okay. I feel like you told me you ate already. Like, I feel like you've said like 3 times this evening. You were like, okay, I'm gonna go eat dinner.
Well, there was a peanut butter jelly sandwich involved around 5 o'clock, and that was
Okay.
5 hours ago.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. I'm okay. I'm really tired. I was yawning the last like hour, and so I'm hoping that I can rein it in while we record the episode so that I'm not yawning the whole time. But other than that, I'm okay. Oh, I guess we'll make this announcement now. We'll remind you at the end. But Pot Ever After is now available on iTunes.
Yes, so if you just type in pot over after with some spaces in between, it'll come up right after this weird podcast about the Bachelors. I don't know why that shows up, but it does. Maybe it won't
It
forever.
probably has something to do with like, yeah, it probably has something to do with like Happily Ever After or something. But yeah, it's on iTunes. You can search it. You can add it. You can subscribe.
You can download
and
it,
when
so you don't have to use
yeah, when
data
we
while
post,
you're driving.
then yeah, and then when we post, it'll automatically show up in your thingamajig, and I'm hoping more people will listen to it because it's on iTunes. So
Yep.
that's exciting. Um, so how about we get into it? Tessa, do you want to remind us what happened in 107?
So if the title of this pod hadn't given it away already, this is the Graham-centric episode. So here's what you missed on Once Upon a Time, episode 7, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. So we focus on Graham, who begins to remember his fairy tale past after forcing a kiss on Emma Swan. And he begins to question his own existence. He's like, do I live here? Do I live in another world? So he seeks the help of a 10-year-old, Henry, who tells him that he lived another life and that he's a fairy tale character. And so then eventually he does remember, even though Regina is set on keeping Graham from the truth. But he doesn't live long enough to share the information with anyone because Regina crushes his heart and he dies in Emma's arms. And then in the flashbacks, we see that in the Enchanted Forest, the Huntsman, Graham, is hired to murder Snow White by the evil queen, but his heart has too much compassion to commit such an evil. And yeah.
So he becomes a sex slave as punishment, which we'll get into later. Just getting right into it. I'm not holding back on this. So why don't we talk about Emma and Graham first and their like quote unquote romance?
Yeah, I wasn't sold on that. I remember when I watched it the first time, I was kind of young, and the straight girl in me was like clinging to any sort of like romance that was offered on screen. So I really liked the possibility of Emma and Graham, and I didn't much care for the fact that it was underdeveloped. But now that now that I've seen it all kind of in one go, I can see how just, like I said, underdeveloped it is. So, felt a little bit forced.
Yeah, that was my feeling too. There's definitely an attraction from like the first episode. I mean, because they're both very attractive people. But the whole idea of like feelings, like really important, heavy feelings, felt very forced, especially because this is like the first time there's explicit mention of Emma's walls, and like not really letting people in, and the fact that it's in relation to her and Graham's relationship, which like we've only seen them together a handful of times, and like one of those times she was pissed at him. Like it felt weird to me to start talking about such an important part of Emma's character with a relationship that like barely gets off the ground. I think that it could have been a really awesome friendship, but like the romantic component doesn't feel very natural to me.
I think that I was also a bit conflicted because there's a few moments in the episode where there's a lot of like tension and chemistry between the two actors. Like she
Yeah.
I don't know, they stand really close to each other. There's some staring. That's all I remember, but you could I mean, in that moment I was kind of partly convinced that they had actually had this big long romance, that they were destined for one another, even though there wasn't a whole lot of text to support that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also the fact that we're watching it with the benefit of hindsight. So like knowing what Emma is really doing by being there, like freeing all of them from this curse, I think makes his passion for her make a little bit more sense. And it also totally undermines the whole argument that they try to convey throughout the whole episode, that like Regina picks him to murder Snow White because he's heartless, and it's like clearly he's not. And I'm using heartless here in a metaphorical sense, not in the literal sense, even though that does happen. But like he has no compassion, and it's like that doesn't. And I guess we'll talk about that. We can talk about that now, but just this whole thing where the Huntsman is heartless doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. I feel like there's a whole lot of, you know, Regina goes up to Graham and she's like, I need someone who will kill anyone who is heartless and terrible. But then, like, in the next minute, he's crying over a deer that he killed. And it feels like the writers are going for some sort of irony, but it's just not translating well. I feel like it's a bit inconsistent.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't know if they actually want you to think, like, do they want you to think that because he can kill humans really easily and not kill animals, that means he's perfect for the job? I mean, in my opinion, it's like to kill an animal and like thank it for feeding you and providing you sustenance is a pretty sensitive and vulnerable person, and if he grew up with humans attacking him, then he's going to be more likely to attack humans. But yeah, I wasn't totally sold on that whole thing with him either. I feel like Graham just got shafted all around, like wasn't really handled well, especially in terms of his relationship with Regina. So Tessa,
Yes.
why is Regina exceptionally disgusting in this episode?
Okay, well, I got a list going. And here, okay, so if you've been listening for the past couple episodes, you know that like every episode I'm like, here's a list of the crap that Regina has done today. Well, let me tell you, it gets worse. When I was watching the episode, I took notes. So here's what I got. So we're gonna save the big one for last. And these are all gonna seem pretty like, what? There's a bigger one? But there is. So the one of the ones is that Regina gaslights Graham. And if that's fairly a new concept to me, and if it is to you, basically it means that Regina manipulates Graham into thinking that he's crazy in order so that she can kind of have the hero role in the relationship. And she does it, like Alana mentioned when we were talking, that she does it to, like, basically everyone in the town. But especially to Graham in the episode, it's very, very present and, like, visible how much he's kind of unraveling. And then another thing is that Regina murders Graham. When Graham starts to express interest in Emma, even though Regina has his heart, she kind of has like a teenage moment where she's crying over his heart, but then she murders him. And we never really find out if Emma discovered the truth behind Graham's death. And I kind of want someone to write a fan fiction. I might write it myself.
She must have suspected, though. Like, even though we never saw it, like, she's not stupid. Like, especially when she finds out that everything's real and stuff, like, she must think about it and be like, that had to have been what happened, because she knows that, like, Graham wasn't crazy and everyone wasn't crazy, so she can just, like, think that, like, Graham was talking about how Regina had his heart and then he suddenly dies. Like, she had to have known, we just don't get to see it. Because if we saw it, then Regina would actually have to face some kind of consequence, because Emma would confront her about it. So I feel like it's just kind of the writers trying to avoid a messy situation so that they can keep Regina as morally ambivalent as possible, so they can just, like, shove her into the good side with a little less difficulty,
a little less baggage,
be able to. Yeah, which is, and it's like, I feel like if I ever got a chance to ask them questions, I'd be like, do you, like, not think that was
crappy?
Like, I guess this is the most complicated, like, yeah, I guess this is just the complicated part of running a TV show, especially if you don't really know where you plan to go with it. Like, and this was my question we asked in the first episode, which was, like, in the first episode of the podcast, which was, like, what were their initial plans for Regina? Was she supposed to be, like, just the main villain for seasons 1 and 2, and then they defeat her and then someone else pops up? Or, like, had they initially planned for this big, huge redemption arc that ultimately doesn't really go anywhere, to the point where it's frustrating to watch and doesn't logically make sense that she can do all these terrible things and we never really see her feel all that bad about doing them. Especially with the fact that she raped somebody for the first...
That's the big one.
7 episodes of the first season, and that's the big one, is,
that Graham...
And
he doesn't have any sort of consent when he sleeps with Regina. And it's 2 different ways, too, because when he's in the Enchanted Forest, she kind of makes the guards send him to her bedchamber. And in Storybrooke, she's got his heart, so she kind of, it's not a good situation, and I'm upset.
Yeah, and I mean, people always say that, like, there's an issue with consent all across Storybook because no one has their memories and no one is making full decisions, but it's the fact that Regina is fully aware that everyone is cursed and she's not. So she has more information than Graham does, which is what makes it especially heinous. It's not like she also is missing memories and they have sex. It's that she knows she's taking advantage of someone who wouldn't sleep with her otherwise. That's what makes it really gross. And it's upsetting to me that they just wrote that and no one in the writer's room was like, hey, this is kind of icky. Like, if we're going to do it, let's at least acknowledge that it is,
right.
And then let's punish that character or have that character show remorse or something to that effect. And the fact that they just ignore it and they've never mentioned it since is just, I mean, I don't think there's another instance in the show where something this bad happens. I mean, we're rewatching, so maybe something will pop up, but to my mind, this is, like, one of the most egregious, narrative points that they just kind of lazily pass over.
Especially since, I don't know, I feel like with Killian and probably with Rumple too, that they bring up that they've done really horrible things. And I know that they kind of they bring it up and they try to solve it. I don't know if that makes sense, but, like, with Regina, she does this really horrible thing, and then it kind of gets pushed to the back burner. So they have to, like, in future seasons, make things up, even though they've got a character with a very clear past of sins that the audience already knows.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like, so, like, Killian will do something really bad, and he'll feel badly about the thing that he did. Like, he kills, spoilers, he killed David's father without knowing it, but when he's upset in those episodes after he realizes it, that's what he's upset about. Regina is never seems to be upset about the things she did. She's upset about how her life is going to be affected.
Yeah. Because
people are going to find out she did those things. She's not remorseful that she did them. She's upset that people find out and how they're going to react to that. Like, Killian is obviously upset at what Emma is going to think of him when she finds out about David's father, but they portray it in such a way that he's obviously upset that there was a murder. Like, he talks about to Belle, too. He says, like, you know, I laid hands on you. That was awful. He, like, says out loud what he did to her, and that he's upset about it. It's not just about the fact that he's going to let Emma down or something like that. He's upset about the things he did, and I really don't understand why they wouldn't have Regina go through that same process. It makes her so much less likable. I, like, don't... If I could ever talk to them, I think that's one of the things I would probably ask. Like, I don't understand the inconsistency of that redemption, of those redemption arcs at all.
In happier news, I think that was the end of my list. That's just as... I know that you probably expected it to continue, and trust me, it will. I don't know how, but it will. But in happier news, so if you get a chance, you should look up Snow White, Once Upon a Time, episode 1, or season 1, episode 7, under Google Images, and you will see the sweetest, most precious dress you ever saw in your life. Her costume in this episode, I told Alana, I was like, I'm commenting on it. You don't have a choice, because it's just white and lace, and she's got this cape on that's got flowers all over it, and she's talking with Graham, and her hair was billowing, and she's just sort of floating along in this forest. And I just, whatever she's doing, sign me up. I think I found my life calling. That is what I've chosen to do with my life, is just wear white lace, flowers, and curly hair, walking gracefully through a forest.
It is a very nice dress, and I wish we could end on that image, but there's one more thing I want to talk about before we take a little break, and that is another Regina quote. You left this off the list of egregious things she says in this episode.
Well, that's because I was thinking about in terms of Graham.
Yeah, we were thinking more in terms of Graham, but she also says some really gross shit to Emma, which is, she says you're incapable of feeling anything for anyone, and that's why you're alone. And Tessa made a comment, you know, that says she's projecting onto Emma, which is true, but it's more upsetting for me because I don't really give a fuck about Regina's feelings because she's terrible for reasons already mentioned.
I'm a psychology major. Cut me some slack.
No, you're totally right, but, like, I just don't have sympathy for her, even though, you know, she probably thinks that about herself. I'm more concerned with the protagonist and her feelings, because especially at this point in season 1, she's probably at her most vulnerable, and, like, you know that this is probably something that Emma has, like, secretly in her heart, or, like, you know, late at night when she was alone, like, this was probably what she thought, was that she assumed that, like, everyone had been leaving her for a reason. Like, there has to be something, and it's probably her, and the reason is that maybe she can't love enough. And this, like, leads directly into the next episode, which we'll talk about a little bit, but I just think Regina reinforces her own fears, you know, as to why people had abandoned her, and that was just super upsetting and made me really angry. I mean, obviously it's really good character building stuff in terms of Emma's character, certainly, but it was just really sad, and it broke my heart. But, yeah, and then, you know, we get to the end, and yet another person leaves Emma, and it's Graham, not of his own doing, but he dies, and Emma has to hold him in her arms as he dies, which is really sad. And we hardly knew him. He was only around for 7 episodes, and then he left to do 50 Shades, which was probably not a good decision. He should have just stayed on Once Upon a Time.
You know what, part of me is like, he should have stayed, but the other part of me was like, did we really want to turn the love triangle with Neil and Killian into a square?
Well,
we don't need a square.
Like, we wouldn't have really... Well, we could have at least, like, maybe, like, Graham could have replaced August. I fucking hate August. Like, even if, like, Graham and Emma, like, hooked up and then they end up being really good friends or something, like, that would have been great. And then, like, we could have had, like, Graham and Ruby or Graham and whoever else, but just... I think he would have been good.
I like him.
But, you know.
Yeah.
I agree. But let's take a little break, and we will return to talk about 108 Desperate Souls. Stick around. And we are back. This is Alana again, and we're going to talk about... And Tessa is also here. I'm hydrated. I'm actually not drinking wine this time. I feel like I probably sound less sober this time around, but it's just exhaustion. It's not alcohol. But okay, so 108 Desperate Souls. It is a Rumpelstiltskin heavy episode, unfortunately, for all of us.
Okay, well...
So in the... let me just do a summary. So in the Enchanted Forest, we learn how Mr. Gold became the Dark One. In a desperate attempt to save his son, Rumpel murders the previous Dark One and absorbs his power. And then in Storybrooke, Emma fights for the chance to be sheriff while proving to Henry that good will prevail, which I thought was a really interesting episode, despite the fact that it's Rumpel heavy, because it created a really interesting parallel between parenting styles of Rumpel and Bagel and Emma and Henry. You guys, it's the first appearance of Bagel Fire.
You know what? He's so sweet and innocent, though. You can't hate him
He's really not. I hate him. Like, remember, like, later seasons now, we find out that he, like, doesn't he, like, take the dagger and make the Dark One do really terrible things? And then, like, Rumpel, like, takes away his memory or something like that?
I'm just gonna pretend that I'm the general audience who is seeing Balefire for the first time and is like, oh, what a sweet, innocent child. Wow.
No, he doesn't deserve it. He's terrible.
And also, I feel like even though Rumpel as a character isn't, like, he's not the greatest guy, he's an interesting character, which makes for an interesting episode. Those are my thoughts.
It's a good episode. I also think that this was Rumpelstiltskin before they kind of turned him into a massive fuckboy, by which I mean, at this point in the show, he seems to just be like an agent of chaos. He doesn't really have any larger goals yet. He's just kind of causing general mischief, kind of like a trickster archetype would, which I kind of would have liked better, I think, because then it would have, I don't know, because it would get so annoying that they would tie up his storyline with someone like Bells, who's very intrinsically good, and anytime he would do something and make you think he was good, suddenly he wouldn't be, and it would, like, give you whiplash, whereas if he was just a trickster character and he betrayed them, it would make sense, because he has no real reason to do otherwise.
Yeah.
But anyway, I like him in these earlier episodes because he doesn't have those loftier goals, and he's just kind of in it for himself, and in it for the power, and in it for the enjoyment of causing general mischief. So there are a few things to talk about in this episode. David Nolan only appears for a second, and he wears a very beautiful Newsy style hat, which makes him look like a paper boy.
And we all know he can sing.
Most of the episode.
Just put him on the stage. Make Josh Dallas be in Newsies. I'm gonna cry. Maybe he can dance.
I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I guess he's just being a good dad, but, like, I don't know why he hasn't been on Broadway yet and done a musical or something. Can you imagine if he was, like, in Into the Woods or something? He would have been so fucking good in that.
I probably would have imploded. Anyway.
I know.
So, I guess I'll just start at the beginning.
Okay, go for it.
The episode opens, and we basically see Rumpelstiltskin is not yet the Dark One, and someone, like, these knights come rolling in, and they're trying to enroll this young girl into the army, which Alana has feelings about, and we will talk about it. But, people start to, like, kind of rise up against the knights, and then we figure out that, oh my gosh, the Dark One is hurting all these people before the knights. That was a really bad description, but he's essentially standing on the side, like, knocking out all the people that try to go against the knights. So the thing that I was wondering about was, that's such a strange concept about the Dark One and authority, because whenever we see the Dark One in any episode after that, we see the Dark One taking its own authority and taking authority over things that it doesn't have power over. Like when it just kind of walks into the apprentice's chamber looking for the dagger and it says, "Give me the dagger." Or when Rumpelstiltskin takes matters into his own hands, and even with Emma and Killian when they become the Dark Ones, uh, it just, you never
doesn't
see. What?
doesn't Rumpelstiltskin steal the dagger from someone else? The Dark One doesn't have the dagger in the beginning, right? Of this episode. Someone is controlling him, is what I thought at the beginning.
Well, I don't know because when Rumpelstiltskin goes to steal the dagger, it's in the Dark One's castle. Like it's available. Like it's not with the knights, and you would think that, it wouldn't be like, at the end of the day, here's your dagger back, Mr. Dark One. Not pleasure doing big business with you. We'll see you tomorrow. I feel like it's
maybe that was just kind of a plot hole. I don't know.
maybe, but that was just interesting that because we never see kind of a Dark One be submissive to any, especially a knight who doesn't have like any sort of magical power over him.
Well, it seems that he wasn't necessarily submissive. He's just doing this because he wants to. But at the same time, like, you see that he doesn't want to be the Dark One anymore. And maybe he saw this as an opportunity because they're in the middle of a war. And where are you going to find a more desperate soul than someone who's being victimized by a war? And so it's probably likely that he was working with them as a means to find someone who would be a good candidate to kill him and take over the Dark One mantle.
Maybe but that's like very that's reading
that
into it. That's not very clear in the text.
No, it's not at all. But that's their thing in this show. Like all the writers, when people start bugging them and they're like, "This doesn't make sense," they're like, "Well, it happened off screen," which is like, I mean, like I don't care about the previous Dark One all that much. So it's like whatever. If we weren't rewatching it and thinking of things later on, I probably, if I was a general audience member, I probably wouldn't care. But like that would be my best guess.
What would you like to discuss
the other thing
next?
I actually want to talk about just briefly because this was something else. Because most of this episode, I think I want to talk about Emma a lot. But we noticed that I think it was like in the middle of the episode or just in one of the Enchanted Forest flashbacks, Rumpel is trying to run away with Balefire, and he's confronted by the soldiers. And I think it's the scene where he tells him to kiss his boot, possibly. That might have been the scene, but one of the guards calls Balefire his bastard son, and at the end of the episode, me and Tessa were both like, was that, like, I thought I heard it wrong, like, what was the point of that? Maybe they hadn't considered Mila's character yet, or they were just trying to emasculate him even more by implying that his son wasn't his son, but I thought it was an odd moment.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, because they mentioned, I think that moment causes Bae to wonder, like, well, what really happened to my mom? And you told me she was dead.
Maybe.
And then, but like, Rumpel says, or I think the knight says that she ran off. And then that's what causes, but that kind of blows my mind, because I'm like, were you aware of Killian Jones, or did you see that mini plot points and say, well, we're going to stick a pirate in there, we're going to cause some conflict? Because if that was the case, it was pretty damn clever.
I mean, well, technically, yeah, like, Rumpel would have met Killian already at this point, because he meets him the once. Before he becomes the Dark One.
We have this running joke when we watch the episodes where we ask, where the fuck is Killian Jones? And normally it's like flashbacks with Snow White, so we're like frozen somewhere, I don't know, reading a book, but in this case, he's actually alive. He's probably sailing the high seas with his lady love. And that's where he is.
Yeah, that's what they're doing at this moment. I know, we wonder where he is because we're so unbelievably bored that we just have to wonder.
Or so unbelievably obsessed. You can decide
that
which.
He's not. I mean, we've talked about him way more than we should be able to, given the fact that he hasn't even shown the fuck up yet or been mentioned or anything. But that's how you know how much we want it, because we've been able to talk about it. Um,
Anyway.
but yeah, anyway, I do want to talk about what we mentioned in the last episode about Emma wanting to be a hero for Henry. Um, what I thought was really interesting in this episode was that for most of the season thus far, Emma has been a pretty pessimistic character. She doesn't seem very hopeful about anything, but she gives this little speech to Mary Margaret where she's like, I don't want Henry to think that this is how good people win. Like, I want good people to win honorably because that is what happens, even though everything she's experienced is in direct opposition to that idea. Like, most of her life, good people don't really win, the bad people win, and there doesn't seem to be much justice for her, and so the fact that she wants Henry to not have to grow up that way and she barely knows him, I thought was a really amazing character moment for her. But I also really liked this moment where she kind of shows a concern that if she's not a hero or a savior, then how is she supposed to be able to be a part of his life? And
Right.
she actually says those words exactly, which we can talk about in the context of this season, but I'm more interested in talking about in context of later seasons, especially the 6th season. She gets this selfless streak, I mean, which she always has, but in the 6th season, when she starts having the visions of her death, there's an episode where she says something like, if the price to pay is my death, I'll pay it. And everyone is like, no one really argues with her about it. And all we get Killian making a face that's kind of like, that's bullshit. But no one, it's never brought up again. But that says to me that she is so desperate to retain the family that she'll do whatever it takes to do so. So, I feel like we should watch her from this point on. What is she sacrificing or what is she giving up so that her family won't leave her, even if it's not really in her best interest to do that. I don't know how you feel about that as a psychology major, if that makes sense to you.
I agree. I think that, yeah. No, I like it because even the last moment of the final battle, like she does that whole speech where I will not kill innocents, I will give hope.
Yeah.
And then she drops the sword no matter what the take, and then Killian's like no, and then
I know.
Yeah, but
yeah, I wasn't, and then this is season 1, but that was something that I was never super crazy about, and
especially since they
yeah, you should be.
They just
yeah,
tell
they just
her,
got married
Regina's like, you can't sacrifice yourself because then he's gonna win anyway. She's like, you know what? That's a good idea. I got some feelings.
I'm just like, how much are you supposed to sacrifice yourself? And that's such a common trope for female characters. It's that the women just give and give and give and give until there's nothing left. And I'm like, you know what? No. And that was why when we were talking about, in the last episode, we were mentioning the food thing and the indulging in food and in yourself and in sex and whatever else it is you find. And not to mention the fact that we didn't even mention this, the one kind of real sex scene we get for her is during a scene where there's food, which the sex pancakes. But it really bothers me that that's not consistent. Most of the time it's just no, I'm gonna die for this, and it's fuck no. I understand, it irritates me that there's no, Killian seems to be the voice for that concern, and he doesn't even really get to be heard. I wrote a whole, mini essay about this, because I thought it was super interesting that it shows up for a second, but then it's not talked about, most things on the show, and it was really frustrating. And I guess I just wanted to go on a little rant about it, because I think it's something that'll bother me forever.
Well, do you feel better now? That was a pretty thoughtful rant.
I feel a little better. Like I said, it'll probably haunt me for the rest of my life, because it irritates me, because I love Emma, but whatever. Why don't we talk about the actual title of the episode, which was Desperate Souls. Tessa, why did you think this was such an interesting title?
Okay, so the whole thing with the Dark One in this episode, there's a motif of the the Dark One feeding off of a desperate soul. I know how to recognize a desperate soul. I'm like, okay, creepy guy, you can calm down. So, we know that with Rumple, the episode shows that he's just desperate to save his son. And that's essentially to save his son. But when you consider that in terms of the different Dark Ones that we know, like just so with Emma, Emma gave into the darkness to save Killian. She gave into being the Dark One because she was desperate to save her true love, who was gonna die if she didn't do it. And then with Killian, it's not quite as clear. I think when he accepts the darkness, he becomes desperate to get his revenge, whether that's on Emma for turning him into the Dark One, or for Rumpelstiltskin for turning him into a pirate, or, well, not turning him into a pirate, but, like, turning him to a vengeful pirate. And that kind of is his downfall. Into, like, as he spirals into, like, this darkness mania. So I thought that was interesting to think about what they were desperate of. Or desperate for.
Yeah, I thought that was great. I mean, we talked about this, like, 2 episodes ago, about Rumple being kind of the consequence of characters not being able to admit to their mistakes or take responsibility for their actions. And for whatever reason, that seems to translate into desperation. I feel like that's something we should keep in mind for the rest of the show, because the darkness is kind of a character for the next 6 seasons or whatever. The darkness makes an appearance. And I thought it was just so poetic how you have both Dark Ones saying, I know how to recognize a desperate soul. And it's really foreboding, because I feel like all the characters in the show are pretty desperate. Like, for different reasons, but it just kind of creates this atmosphere where every single character is vulnerable to making a bad decision out of desperation because they don't know what to do otherwise. So I think it just sets the stakes and the tone for what could happen next really well.
I think, I mean, we were talking about season 6, so it's kind of fresh in my head, but, like, David is really desperate to figure out who killed his father, so he makes some weird choices. Killian is really desperate to, I don't know, cover up his past, so he really damages his relationship with Emma for a while. It's just, Emma is desperate to save her family, so she sacrifices herself. It's just, the list continues. I see what you mean.
Yeah, well, it makes it very emotional, because I don't think there's lots of logic in desperation. That's, like, by its very definition, to be desperate is to kind of forego all logic and reasoning and just kind of follow your emotions, regardless of how smart that is. And I think that's what the darkness relies on. It relies on, like, instinct and feeling things in a very primal way. And in that way, I really like it. That's why it's so disappointing that Rumpelstiltskin kind of becomes a more, not fleshed out, but he becomes less of a trickster character and less of a chaotic character. And so that's another thing that I regret, that they seem to change a little bit with Belle's introduction and all this stuff. But yeah, I thought it was actually a pretty good episode, even though when it started, Tessa reminded me that it was a Rumple-heavy episode, and I was like, oh, god damn it. But it ended up being pretty good. I guess... So I think that's the end.
Well,
I'll say that's the end, unless there was something else.
Well, I was like, I have my notebook in front of me. Because I wanted to end on a light note, you know me. But...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know.
So I don't know if we mentioned, but this is the episode that, Emma becomes sheriff. She takes over for Graham.
Yes, she does. Yeah.
And she's got beautiful hair throughout the whole episode. That's the note that I wrote down. I literally said, Alana, her hair. And I just wanted us to take a minute and appreciate Emma Swan, her beautiful hair, and the fact that she did the right thing and got the position that she deserved.
It's very true. Her hair was very beautiful.
I hope that happens to all of our listeners, that they have beautiful hair and get the positions that they look for. I hope that happens to you, Alana. that you have beautiful hair.
Oh, thank you.
And get the position you apply for.
That would be nice. So before we go, just another reminder that we are on iTunes now. So if you search Pod Ever After and you subscribe and review, it will be really awesome and helpful and all that good stuff.
Also, if you're listening on iTunes, then you can find us on SoundCloud under Pod Ever After. And it's all Pod Ever After, but then if you go on Tumblr, it's podeverafter.tumblr.com. We keep it pretty consistent so that it's easy for you. But if you want to find us or yell at us or whatever, that's where you can find us.
Yes. And then we'll be back in 2 weeks with 109, which is True North, and 110, which is 7:15 a.m., which is oddly specific. I don't remember what either of those episodes are about, so I'm pretty excited.
I think the 7:15 a.m. is when Charming and Snow meet in the diner every morning.
Oh, maybe that's what it is.
When I was looking up Okay, but anyway, that's what you have to look forward to.
Great. Okay, so Tessa, what do you hope happens at the end?
I hope that you all live Pod Ever After.
Oh, me too. Good night, everybody.
Good night.